Rain hammered against the cracked windows of Thomas Mitchell's one-bedroom apartment, each drop echoing the emptiness that had consumed his life for the past 3 years. At 34, he looked older than his years, weathered hands telling the story of countless construction sites and late-night shifts at the warehouse. His wife Sarah had been gone since Emma was 4, leaving behind a man who had forgotten how to live for himself and knew only how to exist for his daughter. Emma slept peacefully in the small bed they shared, her 7-year-old face illuminated by the soft glow of a nightlight shaped like a butterfly. Thomas watched her breathe, the rise and fall of her tiny chest, the only rhythm that mattered in his world. Tomorrow would bring another day of choosing between paying rent or buying Emma new shoes, another day of pretending he wasn't drowning in loneliness while maintaining the facade of a father who had everything under control. 20 blocks away, in a glass tower that scraped the belly of storm clouds, Olivia Carter stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office. At 31, she commanded a business empire worth $200 million, her signature on contracts that could make or break careers. The financial magazines called her ruthless. The board of directors called her brilliant. Her empty penthouse apartment called her nothing at all. The city stretched below her like a circuit board, pulsing with life she rarely touched. Olivia's reflection stared back from the glass, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that had learned to reveal nothing. She had built her company from the ground up after her father's death, transforming his struggling tech firm into a powerhouse that dominated the market. Success had cost her everything else. Friendships, relationships. The ability to trust anyone who might want something from her considerable fortune. The storm outside matched the tempest brewing in the boardroom behind her. Shareholders were nervous about the upcoming merger, competitors were circling like vultures, and the press scrutinized her every move for signs of weakness. Being a woman at the top meant never being allowed to stumble, never being permitted the luxury of vulnerability. Thomas pulled on his worn leather jacket and kissed Emma's forehead before heading into the night. His shift at Morrison's loading dock started at midnight, moving cargo containers, until dawn for barely enough money to keep their heads above water. The rain soaked through his jacket within minutes, but he had learned to ignore discomfort long ago. Meanwhile, Olivia finally left her office at 11:30, her heels clicking against marble floors that echoed with emptiness. The company Christmas party had ended hours ago, but she had stayed behind, preferring spreadsheets to small talk, financial projections to the pretense of holiday cheer. Her driver waited in the warmth of the company sedan while she stood on the sidewalk, watching her breath form clouds in the December air. That night, 2 worlds existed in the same city without touching. The world of Thomas Mitchell, where love came in bedtime stories and pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, and the world of Olivia Carter, where power lunches and hostile takeovers filled the spaces where connection should have lived. Neither imagined that fate was already in motion, weaving their separate struggles into a tapestry of possibility. The storm raged on, washing the streets clean, and setting the stage for an encounter that would redefine everything both of them believed about love, class, and the courage required to let someone see your heart. Thomas was 3 blocks from the loading dock when he saw her. At first, he thought it might be a trick of the streetlight, the way shadows can play games with tired eyes. But as he moved closer, the scene became undeniably real. A woman in an expensive coat crumpled against a brick wall, her designer purse spilled across the wet pavement like scattered dreams. Olivia Carter, though Thomas had no way of knowing her name, had made a rare mistake. After the disastrous board meeting that evening, she had accepted drinks with potential investors, then accepted more drinks at the hotel bar, then somehow found herself stumbling through streets that all looked the same in the rain. Her usual iron control had dissolved in whiskey and exhaustion, leaving her stranded in a part of the city her driver would never think to search. Thomas approached slowly, the way he might approach a wounded animal. He had seen enough of life's casualties to recognize someone in genuine distress, but he also knew that good intentions could be misinterpreted, especially when class lines were involved. The woman's coat probably cost more than he made in 6 months, but she was still human, still vulnerable to the cold rain that was soaking through her carefully styled hair. She looked up when his shadow fell across her face, eyes struggling to focus. For a moment, something passed between them, not recognition, but a kind of acknowledgement that transcended their obvious differences. Thomas saw past the expensive clothes to the exhaustion beneath. Olivia saw past his work boots and faded jeans to the genuine concern in his expression. He offered his hand without saying a word. She stared at it for a long moment before accepting help to her feet, swaying slightly as the world tilted around her. Thomas steadied her with the same gentle care he used when Emma had nightmares, his touch firm but respectful. The smart thing would have been to call her a taxi or help her find her phone. The safe thing would have been to keep walking toward his job and his carefully constructed life. Instead, Thomas made a decision that defied logic but honored something deeper. He offered to help her get home. Olivia tried to give him an address, but the words came out slurred and incomplete. She fumbled for her purse, for her phone, for any anchor to the world she understood. Nothing made sense except the stranger's steady presence, and the realization that she had nowhere else to go. Thomas made another choice that would change everything. He couldn't leave her alone on the streets, couldn't abandon someone so obviously lost. His apartment was small and shabby, hardly fit for someone who clearly belonged in a different universe, but it was warm and dry and safe. The walk to his building took 20 minutes, with Thomas supporting most of Olivia's weight and murmuring the kind of reassurances he used when Emma was frightened. By the time they reached his door, she was barely conscious, trusting this stranger with a faith that alcohol had borrowed from her usual defenses. Emma woke up when they entered, rubbing sleepy eyes and sitting up in bed like a small sentinel. Thomas whispered for her to go back to sleep, but his daughter's curiosity was stronger than her drowsiness. She studied the elegant woman her father was helping to the couch, taking in the expensive shoes and the way the stranger's makeup had smudged with rain. Thomas settled Olivia on the worn sofa and covered her with the quilt his mother had made, the only thing of real value in their modest home. Emma appeared at his elbow in her princess pajamas, whispering questions about their unexpected guest. He explained in the simple terms children understand, that sometimes people need help, and when you can help, you do. Emma nodded seriously, then surprised him by offering her favorite stuffed elephant to the sleeping woman, tucking it carefully beside Olivia's arm before returning to bed. Thomas sat in his single chair and watched over both of them, his daughter and this mysterious woman who had stumbled into their lives like a character from a fairy tale. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, but inside, something new was taking root. Fragile as a seedling, but already changing the landscape of possibilities. Morning came with embarrassment and bewilderment. Olivia woke to unfamiliar surroundings, a small apartment that smelled like coffee and cinnamon, children's drawings taped to a refrigerator that hummed too loudly, the sound of a little girl practicing piano scales on a keyboard that had seen better days. Thomas was scrambling eggs when she stirred, Emma beside him on a step stool, both of them moving with the practiced rhythm of people who took care of each other. Olivia tried to piece together the previous night, remembering fragments, the rain, the stranger's kind eyes, the decision to trust someone she had never met. She sat up slowly, her head pounding and her expensive clothes wrinkled beyond repair. The elephant Emma had given her tumbled to the floor, and she stared at it with something approaching wonder. When was the last time anyone had offered her comfort without wanting something in return? Thomas brought her coffee in a mismatched mug, his manner polite but cautious. He had seen her face in business magazines, recognized her now in the harsh light of day, and the knowledge created distance where kindness had existed in darkness. She was Olivia Carter, and he was nobody special, and daylight had a way of making such distinctions clear. Emma had no such reservations. She climbed onto the couch beside Olivia and began chattering about school and her best friend Jessica and the Christmas pageant where she would play an angel. Olivia found herself listening, actually listening, to the easy flow of a child's concerns, so different from the calculated conversations that filled her days. When Emma asked if Olivia would like to see her drawings, Olivia surprised herself by saying yes. They spread across the coffee table, pictures of families and houses and dogs, all rendered in bold crayon strokes that captured emotion better than technique. Emma explained each one with earnest pride, and Olivia felt something crack open inside her chest, something she had kept carefully sealed for years. Thomas watched from the kitchen, torn between protectiveness and fascination. His daughter was blooming under the attention of this sophisticated stranger, and the woman herself seemed different from the ice queen he had expected. Here, away from boardrooms and power plays, Olivia Carter looked younger, more human, almost fragile. When Olivia announced she should leave, Emma's face fell with the particular devastation children feel when something wonderful threatens to end. She asked if Olivia would come back, if they could have tea parties, if she wanted to see Emma's secret fort made of blankets and chairs. Thomas intervened gently, explaining that Miss Carter was very busy, and probably wouldn't have time for visits. But as he spoke, he caught something in Olivia's expression, a longing that matched his daughter's, a hunger for connection that money couldn't satisfy. Olivia left her business card on the kitchen counter, ostensibly so Thomas could send a bill for dry cleaning or any other expenses. But they both knew it meant something more. A bridge between worlds that seemed impossible to cross. An invitation neither quite dared to voice. 2 weeks passed before Olivia appeared at Thomas's door again, this time sober and composed, carrying an expensive doll for Emma and an awkwardness that revealed how rarely she visited places like this. She claimed she wanted to thank them properly for their kindness, but the real reason was harder to name. The way Emma's laughter had echoed in her empty penthouse, the memory of Thomas's gentle hands, and the safety she had felt in their small apartment. Emma received her with the uncomplicated joy children reserve for people who take them seriously. She gave Olivia a tour of their 3 rooms, proudly showing off her art corner and the bookshelf Thomas had built from salvaged wood. Olivia found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about Emma's favorite stories, and admiring the careful organization of toys and treasures. Thomas remained cordial but distant, serving coffee in the good cups, and answering Olivia's questions about his work with the brief politeness of someone who understood the temporary nature of their interaction. He had Googled her after she left, seen the articles about her ruthless business practices, and her father's legacy. The photographs of her at charity galas, where single tickets cost more than he made in a month. But Emma was a bridge between them, chattering to both adults with equal enthusiasm, unconsciously revealing the loneliness in their separate lives. She talked about missing her mother, about wishing her daddy wasn't so tired all the time, about hoping to visit somewhere fancy like a castle or a museum. Thomas tried to shush her, embarrassed by the glimpse into their struggles, but Olivia was listening with an intensity that surprised them both. When Emma asked Olivia about her work, the explanation of being a CEO sparked endless questions. Did she have a big desk? Did she tell people what to do? Was it scary being the boss? Olivia found herself describing her office, her responsibilities, the weight of decisions that affected hundreds of employees, but through Emma's eyes it all sounded like an adventure rather than a burden. As the afternoon wore on, the conversation became easier, more natural. Thomas relaxed enough to share stories about Emma's kindergarten performances and her determination to adopt every stray cat in the neighborhood. Olivia talked about her own childhood, carefully edited but genuine, about the books she had loved and the dreams she had harbored before business became her entire world. When it was time for dinner, Emma asked if Olivia would stay, and Thomas found himself echoing the invitation despite his reservations. They ate spaghetti with jarred sauce at a table barely big enough for 3, Emma regaling them with detailed accounts of playground politics, while Thomas tried not to notice how Olivia had relaxed into something approaching happiness. The evening ended with Emma falling asleep during a movie, curled between the 2 adults on the small couch. Thomas and Olivia sat in comfortable silence, neither wanting to disturb the child or break the spell of an ordinary moment that felt somehow sacred. For the first time in years, Olivia wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or board meetings. Thomas wasn't calculating bills or worrying about Emma's future. They were simply present, simply human, simply connected by the warm weight of a sleeping child and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they had found something neither knew they were looking for. The fairy tale couldn't last. Olivia's return to Thomas's world had not gone unnoticed, and the business circles she inhabited thrived on speculation and scandal. When photos surfaced of the distinguished CEO entering a rundown apartment building in a working-class neighborhood, the rumors began immediately. Her assistant fielded calls from gossip columnists and business reporters, all wanting to know about Olivia's mystery man. The board members made subtle inquiries about her recent behavior, couching their concerns in language about company image and shareholder confidence. Olivia deflected what she could, but she knew the scrutiny was intensifying. The breaking point came when Thomas arrived at Carter Industries for a lunch invitation Olivia had extended during one of her visits. She had wanted to introduce him to her world, the way he had welcomed her into his, but she underestimated the sharks that circled in corporate waters. The receptionist's barely concealed surprise, the security guard's suspicious questioning, the elevator full of executives who fell silent when Thomas entered. Every moment reinforced the distance between their worlds. Thomas wore his only suit, bought years ago for Sarah's funeral, and tried to ignore the whispers that followed him through marble corridors and past offices that cost more than most people's homes. Olivia met him at the elevator, professional and composed, but Thomas could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile didn't reach her eyes. She gave him a tour of her domain, the conference rooms with their polished tables, the executive floor with its panoramic views, her corner office, where deals worth millions were negotiated with the casualness of ordering coffee. Her colleagues were introduced with careful politeness, but Thomas could read the judgment in their eyes, the questions they were too well-bred to voice. He was clearly out of place in his department store suit and work-calloused hands, a curiosity rather than an equal, someone to be politely tolerated but not truly accepted. The lunch itself was an exercise in subtle humiliation. Olivia's friends from the country club arrived with their practiced smiles and designer clothes, making conversation about places Thomas had never been and experiences he could never afford. They asked about his work with the kind of patronizing interest people reserve for exotic animals, complimenting his hands-on career, while making it clear they considered such work quaint and temporary. Thomas maintained his dignity throughout the meal, answering questions with quiet pride, and refusing to be intimidated by wealth he couldn't comprehend. But Olivia remained silent during the worst moments, choosing professional discretion over defending someone who had shown her nothing but kindness. The final blow came when Marcus Wellington, Olivia's former fiancé and current board member, arrived for what he claimed was an impromptu visit. His presence was clearly calculated, a reminder of the world Olivia belonged to and the expectations that came with her position. Marcus was everything Thomas wasn't. Privileged, educated, connected to the right families and the right schools. He treated Thomas with the casual condescension of someone accustomed to being served, rather than serving others, making jokes that weren't quite cruel enough to be called insults, but left no doubt about his opinion of Olivia's new acquaintance. When he suggested that perhaps Thomas would be more comfortable with the other staff, the words hung in the air like poison. Olivia's silence grew heavier with each passing moment. Thomas could see her retreating into the cool professionalism that was her armor, choosing the safety of her established world over the vulnerability of defending something new and fragile. He made his excuses and left, walking through the marble lobby with the dignity of someone who had learned not to let other people's opinions define his worth. But the damage was done. Trust, once broken, is difficult to repair, and Thomas had seen how easily Olivia could slip back into the role that required her to look down on people like him. Emma asked when Miss Carter would visit again, and Thomas struggled to find words that wouldn't disappoint his daughter while protecting them both from further humiliation. Olivia threw herself into work with renewed intensity, trying to bury her guilt in quarterly projections and merger negotiations. But Emma's drawings remained taped to her office wall, and she found herself staring out the window toward the part of the city where Thomas lived, wondering if she had chosen safety over something infinitely more valuable. The media attention intensified after a photographer captured Thomas leaving Carter Industries, and speculation about Olivia's mysterious companion filled the gossip columns and business blogs. The board called an emergency meeting to discuss the company's image, and Olivia found herself facing the choice she had been avoiding: embrace the connection that had brought unexpected joy to her life, or protect the empire she had built from her father's ashes. Emma's illness changed everything. The 7-year-old who had charmed Olivia with her endless questions and infectious laughter was suddenly pale and listless, running a fever that wouldn't break despite Thomas's careful ministrations. He took her to the emergency room on a Tuesday night, holding her small hand while they waited for hours among other worried parents and crying children. The diagnosis was pneumonia, serious enough to require hospitalization but not life-threatening with proper care. Thomas sat beside Emma's bed through the long night, watching machines monitor her breathing, and feeling helpless in the face of medical bills he couldn't afford and an insurance system that seemed designed to bankrupt working families. He called his supervisor to explain why he wouldn't make his shift, knowing that missing work meant losing pay they desperately needed. The hospital's financial counselor spoke in gentle terms about payment plans and charity care, but the numbers still represented months of choosing between rent and groceries, between Emma's health and their basic survival. Olivia heard about Emma's illness through a circuitous route. Her assistant mentioned a news story about hospital charity drives, which reminded her of children's charities, which led her to think about Emma and the drawings that still brightened her sterile office. She told herself she was simply checking on an acquaintance when she called the hospital, but her hands shook as she asked about visiting hours. She found Thomas slumped in an uncomfortable chair beside Emma's bed, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Emma was awake but drowsy, her usual chatter reduced to whispered conversations with her stuffed elephant. When she saw Olivia, her face lit up with the pure joy children feel when someone important to them appears unexpectedly. Thomas stood awkwardly, unsure how to navigate their strained relationship in this new context. But Olivia's presence was different here. Softer, more genuine, stripped of the corporate armor she wore in boardrooms. She had brought books for Emma and flowers that made the sterile room feel more human, and she listened with complete attention as Emma described her adventure with the breathing machine and the nice nurse who let her pick which arm got the IV. As Emma dozed off, Thomas and Olivia found themselves talking quietly in the hallway, the hospital's neutral territory allowing them to address the elephant that had been growing between them. Thomas apologized for any embarrassment his presence might have caused at her office. Olivia apologized for not defending him when her friends showed their true colors. But the real conversation was deeper than words. Thomas saw past Olivia's wealth to the woman who had driven across town to check on a sick child she barely knew. Olivia saw past Thomas's pride to the father who was sacrificing everything for his daughter's well-being, the man who had opened his home to a stranger without asking for anything in return. When the hospital's billing department began discussing payment options, Olivia quietly arranged to cover Emma's expenses through an anonymous donation to the hospital's children's fund. Thomas never knew the source of the sudden financial relief, but he felt the weight of impossible debt lift from his shoulders, allowing him to focus entirely on Emma's recovery. Olivia began visiting regularly, bringing homework from Emma's teacher and stories from the outside world. She worked on her laptop in the corner of the room while Emma slept, creating a presence that felt both natural and necessary. Thomas started looking forward to her arrivals, grateful for the company and the way Emma's spirits lifted whenever her sophisticated friend appeared. The hospital became a cocoon where class differences mattered less than caring for a sick child. Olivia and Thomas took turns reading to Emma, shared coffee from the vending machine, and discovered they could talk about everything from Emma's future to their own fears and dreams. The careful distance they had maintained began to crumble, replaced by something warmer and more genuine. When Emma was finally discharged, she made both adults promise to stay friends, her child's logic cutting through adult complications with startling clarity. She had been sick, they had taken care of her together, and therefore they belonged together in her understanding of how the world should work. Thomas carried Emma to his old truck, Olivia, walking beside them toward the parking garage. At her car, an expensive sedan that cost more than Thomas made in 3 years, they faced the question of what happened next. Emma was healthy, the crisis had passed, and they were about to return to their separate worlds. But something had changed during those hospital days. They had seen each other without pretense, had worked together for something more important than pride or public opinion. Emma reached from her father's arms to hug Olivia goodbye, and in that moment, all three of them knew that some connections are too strong to be broken by mere circumstances. The scandal broke on a Thursday morning when an ambitious journalist finally connected all the pieces. Photos of Olivia at the hospital, financial records showing the anonymous donation, speculation about the nature of her relationship with Thomas Mitchell, it all exploded across social media and news outlets with the brutal efficiency of modern gossip. By noon, Olivia's assistant was fielding calls from reporters, board members, and shareholders, all demanding explanations for behavior they deemed inappropriate for someone in her position. The company's stock price dipped as investors worried about their CEO's judgment. And competitors began circulating rumors about instability at Carter Industries. The board called an emergency meeting for Friday afternoon, their displeasure barely concealed behind corporate politeness. Olivia sat at the head of the polished conference table, surrounded by men in expensive suits, who spoke in careful euphemisms about image and responsibility, while making their message perfectly clear: end the relationship, or face consequences. Marcus Wellington led the charge with subtle cruelty, suggesting that Olivia's emotional state might be compromising her business judgment, that perhaps she needed time away to reassess her priorities. Others joined in with concerns about public perception and shareholder confidence, creating a chorus of disapproval that would have crushed someone less determined. But Olivia had changed during those hospital vigils. She had seen Thomas sacrifice everything for his daughter's well-being, had witnessed Emma's courage in the face of illness, had experienced the kind of unconditional acceptance she had forgotten existed. The board's concerns about appearances seemed petty compared to the authentic connections she had discovered. The breaking point came when Marcus suggested that Thomas might be after her money, implying that a working-class single father couldn't possibly be interested in Olivia for herself. The accusation was everything she had feared hearing, but now it struck her as absurd rather than convincing. Thomas had never asked for anything, had been embarrassed by her attempts to help, had shown more integrity in a few months than most of her business associates displayed in years. Olivia stood slowly, her decision crystallizing with each word she spoke. She explained that her personal relationships were not subject to board approval, that her private life had no bearing on her professional capabilities, and that anyone who disagreed was welcome to challenge her leadership through proper channels. The room fell silent as she continued, her voice gaining strength with each sentence. She described Thomas as a man of character, Emma as a child who had taught her about priorities, and their friendship as something that had enriched rather than compromised her life. She would not apologize for caring about people who mattered more than stock prices. Marcus made one final attempt to undermine her, questioning whether she was fit to lead a major corporation if she couldn't separate business from sentiment. Olivia's response was swift and decisive. She had built this company from near bankruptcy, had increased its value by 400%, and would continue to make decisions based on sound business principles rather than the prejudices of people who had never faced real challenges. The meeting ended with an uneasy truce, but Olivia knew the battle was far from over. She had chosen her side, but the consequences would ripple through every aspect of her professional life. Some board members would plot against her, competitors would smell weakness, and the media would continue to dissect her personal choices. But as she drove across town to see Emma and Thomas, Olivia felt lighter than she had in years. She had stopped hiding, stopped apologizing for caring about people who had shown her genuine kindness. Whatever came next, she would face it without the armor of indifference that had protected and isolated her for so long. Thomas and Emma were waiting for her in the small apartment that had become more welcoming than her penthouse. Emma launched into excited chatter about her first day back at school, while Thomas searched Olivia's face for signs of the strain he knew she must be facing. They had both seen the news reports, both understood that her visit came at considerable personal cost. Over dinner at their tiny table, Olivia shared the details of her confrontation with the board, her words carefully chosen for Emma's benefit but honest about the challenges ahead. Thomas listened with growing concern, understanding that their friendship was threatening everything Olivia had worked to build. He offered to step back, to end their relationship before it cost her more than she could afford to lose. But Olivia's response surprised them both. She had spent her adult life choosing safety over authenticity, protection over connection, and she was tired of being afraid. Thomas and Emma had reminded her of the person she used to be before success required her to become someone else. Emma, with a child's direct wisdom, asked why anyone would be mean about people being friends. Neither adult had a good answer for that question, but it crystallized the absurdity of a world where caring about others was somehow considered a weakness rather than a strength. As the evening progressed, they talked about practical concerns, increased media attention, the impact on Emma's privacy, the stress of living under public scrutiny. Thomas worried about Emma being photographed or followed, while Olivia considered the business implications of their continued association. But underneath the practical discussions ran a deeper current. The recognition that they had found something worth fighting for, even if they couldn't name it yet. Thomas saw past Olivia's wealth to the woman who had sat by his daughter's hospital bed. Olivia saw past Thomas's circumstances to the man who had opened his home to a stranger in need. When Olivia finally left that evening, she carried with her Emma's latest drawing, a picture of 3 people holding hands under a rainbow, labeled "My Family" in careful 7-year-old printing. The simple artwork represented everything the board meeting had missed, everything that mattered more than stock prices and public opinion. The war for public perception was fought in boardrooms and newsrooms, but the real battle was simpler and more profound. The choice between fear and love, between safety and authenticity, between the life Olivia was expected to live, and the life that might actually make her happy. The press conference was scheduled for Monday morning, giving Olivia the weekend to prepare remarks that would either salvage her reputation or torpedo her career. Marcus and his allies on the board expected a public apology and the announcement of a more appropriate romantic interest. Preferably someone from their own social circle who would enhance, rather than complicate her public image. Thomas spent the weekend with Emma, taking her to the park and the library, trying to maintain their normal routine while reporters lurked outside their apartment building. He had offered multiple times to remove himself from Olivia's life, understanding the cost of their association better than she seemed to realize. But Olivia had refused each offer with increasing determination, her resolve strengthening rather than wavering under pressure. Sunday evening brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus Wellington arrived at Thomas's apartment with an offer wrapped in velvet threats. He could arrange a substantial payment, enough to solve Thomas's financial problems permanently, in exchange for a quiet disappearance from Olivia's life. The money would be disguised as a consulting fee or business opportunity, allowing Thomas to maintain his pride while accepting what Marcus clearly considered charity. Thomas listened to the proposal with growing anger, recognizing the assumptions that underlied the generous offer. Marcus believed that every man had a price. That working-class integrity was simply a luxury Thomas couldn't afford. That someone in his circumstances would naturally choose money over principle. The conversation took place on the apartment building's front steps while Emma played inside, Marcus unwilling to enter what he clearly considered unsuitable surroundings. His condescension was polite, but unmistakable, his certainty that Thomas would accept the offer revealing everything about his view of class and character. Thomas's refusal was quiet but absolute. He explained that Olivia's friendship wasn't for sale, that Emma's happiness couldn't be purchased, and that some things mattered more than money. Marcus's surprise was genuine. He had never encountered someone who would choose dignity over financial security, principles over practical advantage. As Marcus prepared to leave, he delivered a final warning about the consequences of refusing such generosity. Olivia's career would suffer, her company would face hostile takeovers, and Thomas would be blamed for the destruction of everything she had built. The threat was clear: accept the money or accept responsibility for ruining a brilliant woman's life. But Thomas had learned something about Olivia during their months of friendship, something Marcus had never understood despite years of proximity. She was stronger than her detractors imagined, more resilient than her supporters knew, and capable of making her own choices regardless of the costs. His job was to support her decisions, not make them for her. The press conference began at 10 Monday morning, with Olivia standing behind a podium facing a room full of reporters, board members, and competitors who had come to watch her either surrender or self-destruct. The prepared remarks in her folder would have satisfied everyone. A carefully worded explanation of charitable work with underprivileged families, a commitment to maintaining appropriate boundaries between personal and professional life, and an implicit promise to end her association with Thomas Mitchell. But as Olivia looked out at the sea of expectant faces, she saw Thomas and Emma in the back row, having somehow gained entry despite the security measures. Emma wore her best dress and held her father's hand, her 7-year-old face serious with the gravity of the moment. Thomas looked terrified but determined, ready to support Olivia regardless of what she chose to say. The prepared remarks stayed in the folder. Instead, Olivia spoke from the heart, about a man who had shown her kindness when she needed it most, about a child who had taught her to value authenticity over appearance, about the difference between success and happiness. She described Thomas as someone of exceptional character, Emma as a bright light in a world that often seemed dark, and their friendship as a gift she wouldn't trade for any amount of professional security. The room erupted in shouted questions and camera flashes, but Olivia continued speaking, her voice growing stronger with each word. She talked about the loneliness of leadership, the cost of constant performance, the way Thomas and Emma had reminded her that vulnerability could be a strength rather than a weakness. When a reporter asked if she was romantically involved with Thomas, Olivia paused and looked directly at him across the crowded room. Her answer was simple and devastating. She cared deeply about both father and daughter, they had enriched her life immeasurably, and anyone who considered such caring inappropriate was welcome to challenge her leadership through proper channels. The questions continued for 20 more minutes, each one designed to trap her in contradictions, or force admissions that could be twisted into scandal. But Olivia answered with the same honesty that had characterized her relationship with Thomas and Emma, refusing to hide behind corporate speak or calculated ambiguity. As the press conference ended, Marcus and several board members stormed out, their faces promising consequences that would follow. But other board members approached Olivia with unexpected support, admitting they had been impressed by her courage and honesty, tired of the political games that had consumed too much energy and attention. Thomas and Emma waited until the room cleared before approaching the podium. Emma launched herself into Olivia's arms, chattering excitedly about being on television and how pretty Olivia looked in her business suit. Thomas hung back, overwhelmed by what Olivia had risked for them, uncertain how to express gratitude for such a public act of faith. Their embrace was captured by a lingering photographer, but neither of them cared any more about public perception or professional consequences. Olivia had chosen authenticity over safety, and Thomas had chosen to stand beside her regardless of the costs. Emma had simply chosen love, the way children do, without calculation or reservation. The aftermath would bring new challenges. Hostile takeover attempts, board rebellions, media scrutiny that would test their relationship in ways they couldn't imagine. But they would face these challenges together, as a family that had been chosen rather than assigned, as people who had learned that some connections transcend circumstance and survive any storm. The real victory wasn't in the press conference or the board meetings, but in the quiet moments that followed. Thomas teaching Olivia how to braid Emma's hair, Olivia helping Emma with homework at their tiny kitchen table, the three of them building blanket forts and sharing inside jokes that no amount of money could purchase. They had found something rare and precious in a world that often seemed designed to keep people apart. They had found each other, and that was worth everything they had risked and everything they might yet face together. The months that followed tested every aspect of their unconventional family. Carter Industries weathered attempted takeovers and board rebellions, with Olivia fighting to maintain control of the company she had built from her father's failing legacy. Some longtime employees left for competitors, uncomfortable with the media attention surrounding their CEO's personal life. Others rallied to her support, inspired by her honesty and tired of corporate cultures that demanded constant performance over authentic leadership. Thomas faced his own challenges as reporters dug into his background, looking for scandals that didn't exist and creating speculation where facts were insufficient. Emma's school required additional security measures, and Thomas struggled with the loss of privacy that had become the price of loving someone in the public eye. But the relationship that had begun with a chance encounter in the rain had grown into something neither circumstance nor criticism could destroy. Thomas learned to navigate charity galas and business dinners, not by changing who he was but by bringing his authentic self to spaces that had forgotten the value of genuine character. Olivia learned to find joy in small moments, bedtime stories and scraped knees, and the particular exhaustion that comes from caring for a child who tests every boundary with scientific determination. Emma thrived in the expanded definition of family, equally comfortable discussing quarterly reports and playground politics, bringing her unique perspective to both worlds, with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her worth or place in the universe. One evening, as they sat around the table in Olivia's penthouse, Thomas having finally agreed to move in after Emma's campaign involving charts and logical arguments that would have impressed any board of directors, Emma announced that she had figured out the secret to happiness. Both adults looked up from their respective tasks, curious about 7-year-old wisdom. The secret, according to Emma, was simple. You had to choose the people who made you feel like yourself, even when yourself wasn't perfect. She had watched both Thomas and Olivia become more real, more genuine, more happy since they had become a family, and she couldn't understand why anyone would think that was wrong. As Thomas and Olivia exchanged glances across the table, they realized Emma had articulated what they had been feeling but couldn't express. They hadn't fallen in love with idealized versions of each other, but with the real, flawed, complicated humans they actually were. Thomas loved Olivia's ambition and her vulnerability, her strength and her moments of doubt. Olivia loved Thomas's steadiness and his capacity for growth, his devotion to Emma and his quiet integrity. The formal proposal came 6 months later, not with a grand gesture or expensive ring, but with a quiet conversation after Emma had fallen asleep between them during movie night. Thomas asked if Olivia wanted to make their partnership official, to face whatever challenges came next as husband and wife rather than just as two people who happened to love each other. Olivia's answer was immediate and certain. They were already family in every way that mattered, already committed to each other's happiness and Emma's future. The wedding ceremony could wait for logistics and lawyers, but the marriage had begun the night Thomas offered shelter to a stranger in the rain. Emma woke up the next morning to find both adults wearing matching silly grins and her stuffed elephant positioned as witness to what she immediately proclaimed the best news ever. She had gained not just a stepmother but a co-conspirator in the gentle chaos of loving Thomas Mitchell, a man who had learned that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as problems to be solved. The wedding, when it finally happened, was small and perfect. A ceremony in the hospital chapel where Emma had recovered, surrounded by the nurses who had become extended family, and the few board members who had supported Olivia's choice to lead with her heart as well as her mind. Emma served as both flower girl and ring bearer, her serious 7-year-old face reflecting the gravity of the moment as she handed over symbols of commitment that would last long after the flowers had faded. Thomas and Olivia wrote their own vows, speaking honestly about the journey that had brought them together and the future they intended to build. They promised to choose each other daily, to face challenges together, to remember that love was both a feeling and a decision, both a gift and a responsibility. As they kissed to seal their marriage, Emma cheered with the enthusiasm of someone who had engineered the entire romance through the simple expedient of believing that people who cared about each other belonged together. In her understanding of the world, love was the most logical outcome possible, and she couldn't imagine why it had taken the adults so long to figure out what she had known from the beginning. The reception was held in their penthouse, now truly home to all three of them, with Emma's artwork displayed alongside Olivia's business awards and Thomas's carefully crafted furniture. The guest list was eclectic: construction workers and corporate executives, teachers and board members, people who had supported them through the challenges and those who had learned to respect what they had built together. Marcus Wellington attended, his presence a surprise that spoke to the changes time had wrought in all their lives. He approached Thomas during the dancing, offering a genuine apology for his earlier behavior and admitting that he had underestimated both Thomas's character and Olivia's wisdom. Some lessons, he acknowledged, could only be learned through experience, and watching Olivia's happiness had taught him things about leadership and life that business school had never mentioned. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Thomas, Olivia, and Emma found themselves alone on the terrace, looking out over the city where they had found each other. Emma fell asleep in Thomas's arms, while Olivia traced patterns on the table with her finger, both adults overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had built from a single act of kindness on a rainy night. They talked quietly about the future. Emma's education, the company's expansion plans, the possibility of more children, the dreams they could now pursue together rather than separately. But underneath the practical discussions ran a deeper current of gratitude for the chances they had taken, the risks that had led to rewards they could never have imagined. The story that had begun with loneliness and rain had become one of connection and hope, proof that love could transcend circumstance when people were brave enough to see past surface differences to the hearts beating underneath. Thomas had found not just a wife, but a partner in raising Emma, someone who brought new possibilities to their small family. Olivia had found not just a husband, but an anchor to the authentic self she had almost forgotten existed, someone who valued her heart as much as her achievements. And Emma had gained not just a stepmother but a testament to the power of remaining open to love, even when logic suggested that hope was foolish and trust was dangerous. She had watched two adults learn to be vulnerable, to choose each other despite the costs, to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of their separate lives. Years later, when Emma was older and asking about their family's beginning, Thomas and Olivia would tell the story honestly, about the rain and the loneliness, about the mistakes and the misunderstandings, about the choice to keep loving even when love seemed impossible. They would explain that real love wasn't the fairy tale version that solved all problems instantly, but the daily decision to show up for each other, to choose connection over isolation, to believe that some risks were worth taking even when the outcome was uncertain. The apartment where it all began still exists, now used as a guest house, when Emma's friends visit, or when Thomas and Olivia need to remember where they started. The couch where Olivia first slept safe in a stranger's home, the kitchen table where Emma charmed a sophisticated CEO with crayon drawings, the bedroom where three people learned that family isn't always about blood, but sometimes about choice. All of it preserved as a reminder that the most important transformations often begin with the smallest gestures of human gestures. Kindness. Their story became proof that love can be found in unexpected places, between unlikely people, in moments when hope seems foolish but turns out to be the most practical choice possible. A lonely single dad and a drunk CEO found each other in the rain and discovered that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as problems to be solved, as strangers to be helped, as connections that make no sense until they become the only thing that matters. In the end, they had learned Emma's secret. Happiness came from choosing the people who made you feel like yourself, even when yourself wasn't perfect, especially when yourself needed someone else to help carry the load of being human in a world that often seemed designed to keep authentic connections at bay. They had chosen each other, daily and deliberately, and in doing so had created something larger than the sum of their separate selves, a family built on foundation of kindness, sustained by commitment, and strengthened by the recognition that love, when it's real, doesn't make life easier but makes everything else worth the effort required to live fully, honestly, and together.